Dr. Kian Rami was not a typical human. While most people dreamed of becoming explorers or traders in space, Kian had always been interested in something different, understanding life. He was a biologist, one of the top in the Galactic Alliance, known for his peaceful work with different alien species. For the past 3 years, he had lived aboard a large science vessel called GA-9 Horizon, floating far from Earth in deep space. His job was unusual. Every few months, new species from across the galaxy came aboard the ship. Kian's job was to study how different species lived, breathed, grew, and, when allowed, how they reproduced. Of course, everything he did followed a strict rule book. Nothing was done without full respect and permission. He worked with kindness and patience, and everyone on the ship knew he was a man of strong morals. One day, a group of aliens from the planet Valari Prime arrived for a cultural exchange program. They were tall, smooth-skinned beings with soft, shifting colors on their bodies, especially around their arms and faces. Among them was a young Valari woman named Lisiri. She was beautiful in an alien way. Her skin shimmered softly like pearls, and her eyes were large and violet, always calm and curious. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her voice had a musical tone to it. Kian first noticed her during a group session where he was explaining human biology to a mix of species. While others asked questions about cells, organs, and DNA, Lisiri stayed silent, only observing, but her eyes stayed on Kian the entire time, not in a strange or threatening way, more like she was trying to understand him. A few days later, when Kian was checking equipment in one of the observation rooms, he heard the door open softly behind him. He turned to see Lisiri standing there, her hands held together in front of her, almost nervously. Kian smiled politely. "Can I help you, Lisiri?" he asked. She walked closer, looking around at the strange human tools on the wall. Then she looked at him seriously and asked something that caught him completely off guard. "Are you mating with all species?" she said softly. "Can you do it with me?" Kian blinked. He almost dropped the tool in his hand. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. For a second, he thought she was joking, but her face was calm and serious. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't flirting. She was asking a question, like it was normal. I'm sorry," Kian said carefully. "What did you mean by that?" Lisiri tilted her head slightly. "You're a human who studies living things, and I saw how you touch and observe others. Some of my people say you're trying to learn from every kind. I want to be part of that. Learning." Kian shook his head gently. "I don't do that kind of work. I study biology, yes, but I never mate with any species. That's not part of my job. I only study what's allowed, and always with care. I would never cross that line." Lisiri blinked slowly, taking in his words. "So you don't want to understand me like that?" Kian frowned. "It's not that I don't want to understand you, but mating is not how we connect in human science. It's not necessary. There are other ways to study life." Lisiri stayed quiet for a moment. Then she said, "On Valari, mating is not just a physical act. It's how we build understanding. It's how we build trust. If I ask you, it's because I want to connect, not for desire, but for meaning." Kian didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. There was no emotion of temptation or teasing in her voice. It was calm, like someone asking to share a secret. For her, the question wasn't about attraction, it was about trust. He finally replied, "I'm honored, Lisiri, truly, but I don't think I can answer your question. It's not something I take lightly, and I don't want to do something that would make either of us uncomfortable." She gave a slow nod and stepped back. "I understand. Thank you for being honest." As she turned and walked out, Kian stood frozen for a few seconds. The room felt oddly quiet. He stared at the door she had just exited from, her words still in his mind. That night, as he sat in his cabin, looking out at the stars, he thought about Lysiri's question again. Not because it was strange, but because of the way she asked it. So calmly, so respectfully. For her people, connection had a deeper meaning. She wasn't trying to embarrass him or make him uncomfortable. She was asking something deep, something that meant more to her than simple curiosity. Kian sighed and leaned back in his seat. His work had always been about science, but now, for the first time, it felt like it might become something more. Since the day Lysiri asked her unusual question, something changed between her and Kian. She no longer looked at him like a stranger, and he didn't see her as just another alien visitor. There was now a quiet connection, one they didn't speak about but both felt. Every day, Lysiri visited the science lab, not to ask more questions but to observe. She would sit quietly in the corner while Kian worked with other species. Sometimes she helped him carry equipment or sorted digital samples without being asked. She wasn't just curious about humans, she was curious about him. Kian found himself enjoying her presence. She never interrupted his work or crossed any lines. Instead, she brought him small gifts, items from her world, a glowing crystal that responded to voice, a hand-woven scroll filled with ancient Valari symbols, even a soft fruit that changed color when ripe. Each gift came with a quiet explanation and a kind smile. One day, while he was recording heartbeat patterns of a water-based life form, Lysiri sat beside him and asked softly, "Do your people fear emotions?" Kian looked up. "Fear them? No, I don't think so." "Then why do you avoid them?" she asked. He didn't know how to answer. He thought about it for a moment and said, "Because emotions make things complicated. I have responsibilities. If I let feelings get in the way, I might lose control of my decisions." Lysiri nodded thoughtfully. "In my world, emotion is not weakness. It's part of growth. You cannot understand another if you don't feel." That idea stayed with Kian for days. His world had always been one of rules, logic, and limits. Everything had a structure. Feelings were seen as personal, sometimes even distracting. But to Lysiri, feelings were the path to understanding. Maybe that's why she asked what she did, because she wasn't looking for a physical answer, but an emotional one. Some crew members started to notice her closeness to Kian. A few whispered behind his back. "The human is getting too close," someone said. "That Valari girl is watching him too much," another added. Kian knew about the talk, but he chose to ignore it. He had done nothing wrong. Besides, his bond with Lysiri was more than curiosity. It was built on trust and respect. Still, the captain of the vessel, Commander Rila, called Kian into her office one evening. She was a strict but fair leader, and she had always respected Kian's work. "Kian," she said seriously, "I need to speak with you about your interactions with the Valari delegate." "You mean Lysiri?" he asked. "Yes, there are concerns. Some think you're becoming emotionally involved." Kian straightened in his chair. "Commander, I assure you I've followed all protocols. Lysiri is not a test subject. She is a guest. She comes to the lab on her own." Commander Rila nodded. "I believe you. But the Alliance has rules for a reason. If there's even a chance of emotional involvement, we must review it, especially with someone from Valari Prime. They have strong customs." Kian understood. "I won't cross any lines." After the meeting, he returned to his cabin. That night, Lysiri knocked on his door for the first time. She held a small box in her hands. "I brought something," she said. Inside the box was a small crystal tablet. She tapped it gently, and a soft light shone from it, projecting an image in the air. Two Valari figures wrapped in light, moving in a slow, graceful dance. "This is how our people bond," she explained. "It's called the trust ritual." Before any deep connection, we share movement. It's how we read each other's energy. It's not touching, just being. Kian watched the figures move. It wasn't romantic in the human sense. It was peaceful, respectful, even beautiful. "Have you done this ritual before?" he asked. Lysiri shook her head. "No. I left Valari before I was allowed to. They didn't accept my ideas. I believed we could learn from other species. That was forbidden." Kian looked at her with new understanding. She wasn't just curious. She was brave. She had left her world behind for what she believed. "Why did you choose me?" he asked quietly. She met his eyes. "Because you didn't laugh. You didn't turn away. You respected my question. You treated it with care." He didn't know what to say. His heart felt full, but his mind was still cautious. "I want to understand," he finally said, "not just your biology, but your story." Lysiri smiled softly. "Then let's begin with silence. In Valari, silence is the first word of truth." They sat together for a long time, saying nothing, just sharing the space, breathing the same air, and letting the silence speak. There was no rush, no pressure, just presence. From that day on, their bond deepened, not through science or study, but through shared time, quiet conversations, and simple gestures. She would bring him ancient texts to read. He would show her old Earth music. They laughed at strange words in each other's languages. They listened more than they spoke. Kian didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. Lysiri was teaching him something no textbook ever had. It wasn't about mating with all species. It was about understanding just one. As the days passed aboard the GA-9 Horizon, the bond between Kian and Lysiri continued to grow. Their connection wasn't loud or dramatic. It was gentle, thoughtful, and full of quiet understanding. Most of the crew had stopped whispering now. They had come to see that Kian was not breaking any rules. He was simply spending time with someone who made him feel at peace. But things were not as calm inside Kian's mind. He had begun to feel something new. He still respected Lysiri as a guest and a fellow being. But now, her presence filled a space in his heart that had been empty for a long time. He found himself thinking about her even when she wasn't around. When he worked, he imagined how she would see the data. When he ate, he remembered how she always chose fruits over anything else. She had become a part of his daily thoughts. Still, he hadn't crossed any lines. They hadn't touched hands. They hadn't spoken of love. But the feeling was there, silently growing between them. One evening, Kian was in the main research lab looking through his personal database when he stumbled across a news file he hadn't seen before. It was a message from the Valari home planet. Out of curiosity, he opened it. What he read shocked him. The message was a record from a political council on Valari Prime. It stated that Lysiri, daughter of Councilwoman Shariel, had been exiled from her home for choosing to study and engage with non-Valari species. Her views were seen as dangerous to their traditions. She had left her home planet not by choice, but because she was forced to. Kian leaned back in his chair, stunned. She never told him. He had assumed she was a curious traveler, like many others. But she had lost her home, her family, and her place in her own society, because she believed in something different. Later that night, when they met for their usual tea ritual in the observation room, Kian couldn't keep the discovery to himself. "Lysiri," he said softly, "why didn't you tell me about your past? I found the record from Valari Prime." She stared into her teacup for a moment before answering. "Because I didn't want you to see me as someone broken." "You're not broken," he said at once. "I believed in connection." She said slowly, "I believed that different species can understand each other deeply, not just through science, but through shared hearts. But on Valari, that belief is dangerous. My family is part of the High Council. They told me I was dishonoring them. Is that why you asked me that question back in the lab? Kian asked. Yes, she replied, her voice soft. I had nothing left to lose. I had no home. I wanted to be seen, to be understood. I saw you working with other species, with kindness. I wondered if maybe you could see me not as an alien, but as someone worth connecting with. Kian felt his chest tighten. Her words were not just emotional. They were brave. She had reached out to him in trust, even after losing everything. I didn't answer you that day, he said, because I didn't understand what you truly meant. No, she whispered. But you still respected me. That was enough. Their eyes met in the dim light of the stars outside the window. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of meaning. But life on the horizon didn't stop for feelings. The next morning, an urgent message arrived from Valari, Prime. The Valari leadership had discovered that Lysiri had been staying aboard the Alliance vessel and spending extended time with a human. They were furious. They demanded that Lysiri return to her home planet to face formal questioning by the High Council. She was accused of damaging the sacred Valari customs by forming what they called an unnatural emotional bond. Kian was angry, not just for Lysiri, but for the unfairness of it all. She had done nothing wrong. She had spoken kindly, asked questions, and shared knowledge. And yet her people were ready to punish her again. When Kian told her about the message, Lysiri did not cry. She did not protest. I knew this day would come, she said quietly. They were always watching. They fear what they don't understand. I don't want to lose you, Kian admitted. You're not losing me, she replied. But I must go back. If I run, I prove them right. If I return, I stand for what I believe. Kian felt helpless. All his training, his science, his experience, none of it taught him what to do when the heart was involved. I want to help, he said. She looked at him with calm, serious eyes. Then don't forget me. Whatever happens next, remember that. We were not wrong to care. The next day, a Valari diplomatic ship arrived to take Lysiri home. She packed her things, gave Kian her crystal scroll, and stood in the docking bay with her usual quiet strength. Before boarding the ship, she turned to him one last time and said, I asked, not out of desire, but out of trust, and with that, she was gone. Kian stood alone, holding the scroll tightly in his hands. He had always believed science could explain everything. But now he understood. Some things, like courage, trust, and connection, could only be explained by the heart, and something inside him told him this was not the end. After Lysiri left, everything felt quiet on the GA-9 horizon. The ship still moved through the stars. The crew still followed their routines, but for Kian, the heart of the ship was missing. He tried to keep working like before, studying new samples, reviewing data, preparing reports. But nothing felt right. Every room reminded him of her, the corner where she used to sit, the shelves where she had placed her gifts. Even the soft sound of her voice sometimes echoed in his mind. He replayed her last words again and again. I asked, not out of desire, but out of trust. That sentence now carried more meaning than ever. She had trusted him with her truth, and now she was going back to a planet that might never understand her. Days passed, then a full week, and still no word from Valari Prime. One evening, while reviewing a report, Kian received a secure message marked Urgent, Confidential. It was from Dr. Elena Var, a human diplomat working with the Galactic Alliance. Kian opened the message. Inside was a video clip of Lysiri, standing before the High Council on Valari Prime. Her voice was calm, but her eyes looked tired. She was explaining her time aboard the Horizon. She spoke clearly and gently about their rituals, her interest in other cultures, and her belief that connection was not a threat, but a path to growth. Then the screen showed angry voices rising. One of the council members shouted that she had betrayed Valari values by sharing emotional rituals with an outsider. Another accused her of inviting cultural shame. The video ended with a message. Her final hearing is in 3 days. You may request a formal visit to speak if you wish. Kian felt a mix of worry and determination rise inside him. He had seen enough. He couldn't stay silent anymore. He marched straight to Commander Ryla's office. I want to go to Valari Prime, he said. She looked at him carefully. You understand what you're asking? Their council doesn't allow many visitors. If you go, it could affect your work with the Alliance. I know, Kian replied, but I don't care about reputation right now. I care about what's right. The commander nodded slowly. Then I'll prepare your travel permit. Within 2 days, Kian arrived on Valari Prime. It was his first time on the planet. The atmosphere was soft and warm. The buildings were tall and curved, made from shining stone and glowing vines. The people moved gracefully, never rushing, always silent. He was taken to the capital, where the High Council building stood like a mountain of glass. Guards led him through long halls filled with symbols and carvings of Valari history. Finally, he was brought into a great circular room. In the center stood Lysiri, wearing traditional robes. Her face lit up the moment she saw Kian enter. The Ba Council stared at him. You are Dr. Kian Rami of Earth? One of them asked. Yes, Kian said. I've come to speak, not as a scientist, but as someone who knows Lysiri. You were involved in the emotional bonding with her? Another asked. Kian stood firm. I never forced or pushed anything. Lysiri came to me with respect. She never asked for attention. She asked to be understood. And I listened. The room fell silent. She believed in something most of you are afraid to face, Kian continued. She believed that emotion doesn't weaken tradition. It makes it stronger. She risked everything for the truth. And now you call that a crime? Another council member interrupted. She shared private rituals with a human. Kian replied. She shared meaning. She didn't break your laws. She opened a door. Lysiri looked at him with quiet gratitude. It was clear that no one had spoken for her like this before. I'm not here to fight you, Kian said, calming his voice. I'm here to say I respect Lysiri, not just for who she is, but for what she stands for. She showed me a side of your culture that's full of beauty, courage, and depth. He paused. And if understanding each other is wrong, then maybe the laws need to grow. The council whispered among themselves. Minutes passed. Then a decision was made. Lysiri would not be punished. She would not be forced into silence. Instead, the council agreed to give her one choice: stay on Valari and follow the old ways, or leave, and continue her journey of cross-species learning as a free being. The room turned to her. Lysiri looked at her people, then at Kian. She stepped forward, voice steady. I choose freedom. And with that, the final decision was made. Later, they stood under the glowing sky of Valari Prime. Kian turned to her and said, I thought I lost you. You didn't, she replied. You came when it mattered most. They didn't speak of love, not yet, but their hands brushed for the first time, softly, respectfully, and full of understanding. In that simple touch, a promise was made. They would face what came next together, not as human and alien, but as two souls who chose connection over fear. After Lysiri chose freedom, Kian and she left the Grand Hall together. The world outside Valari Prime felt different now, both familiar and new. They had faced the hardest test, and the weight of the Council's decision lifted some of the fear that had followed them. But their journey was far from over. The galaxy was vast, and there was much still to learn. Lysiri and Kian decided to find a place where they could both belong, somewhere quiet and peaceful, away from judgment and rules, that tried to control what people could feel or who they could be. They found a small green planet on the edge of the Galactic Alliance's map. The planet was untouched by war or politics. Its forests were filled with strange trees that whispered in the wind, and its rivers sparkled like diamonds under twin suns. There, Kian and Lysiri began their new life. At first, it was simple. They shared stories around small fires at night. Kian taught Lysiri about Earth's oceans and mountains, while Lysiri showed him how Velari listened to the stars through special crystals. The days were full of discovery, but also quiet peace. They built a small home together, made from wood and stone, but filled with light and laughter. Their bond grew deeper, not just because they spent time together, but because they listened. They learned each other's fears, hopes, and dreams. They did not need words to understand. Sometimes a look or a smile said everything. One afternoon, while exploring a nearby river, Lysiri stopped suddenly. She looked at Kian and said, "I never believed I could find this, a place to be myself, with someone who truly listens." Kian smiled. "Neither did I. I thought science was all I needed, but now I know the heart is just as important." They sat by the water's edge, watching colorful fish swim beneath the surface. For a moment, the world was quiet, except for the sounds of nature. As time passed, they received messages from friends across the galaxy, humans, Velari, and others who had heard of their story. Many were inspired. Some wanted to visit and learn how different beings could live in harmony. Kian and Lysiri welcomed everyone with open hearts. They became teachers and students at once, sharing knowledge and love in equal measure. One evening, under a sky filled with sparkling stars, Lysiri took Kian's hand and said softly, "You once asked if you could do it with me. I think now I understand what that meant." Kian looked at her, curious. "It wasn't about species," she said. "It was about trust. About choosing to be together no matter where we come from." He nodded slowly. "And I say yes, to trust, to connection, to us." They didn't need ceremonies or titles. Their bond was real because it was chosen freely, without fear or shame. The years that followed were filled with new challenges and joys. Sometimes they missed their old lives, the people, the places, the safety of routine, but they never regretted their choice. Together, they proved that love and understanding could cross any boundary, even those written in the stars. And so, their story became one told across the galaxy, not as a tale of two different species, but as a lesson in courage, respect, and the power of the heart.